Luke 18, verses 1 through 8. All right. Now, where did I put my glasses? Here they are, somewhere. The title of this is called, the title of the topic in my Bible is The Parable of the Persistent Widow. Now, one thing I want to tell you something about a parable. What I believe about a parable. You know, we all have encountered parables in the Bible, right? We all know that we read parables. But I want to give you a definition of a parable, or it's my opinion of a parable. My belief is a parable is a truth that is either happened or will happen. Okay? That's my definition of a parable. Some people believe that parables are things that Jesus wrote down and gave to be an example. But I believe a parable is a truth that has either happened or will happen. I don't think Jesus is going to put anything in the Bible that did not happen or will not happen. So remember that. Jesus told the disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. He said in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about what people thought. Then there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, "Grant me justice against my adversary." For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this woman keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually come and attack me." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" The word of God for the people of God. Jesus in the story today tells the story of a widow. Now, notice she's a widow who refuses to give up. And I pray today that you're one of those people. Now I don't know if y'all know anything much about me and Barry. Me and Barry, I believe, on the same ground. We're pretty persistent, resilient. I know it is when we come play ball, aren't we? Me and Barry, we just go right at it. I mean, but you know, that's one thing that is good for you, to be persistent and never give up on life, no matter what it is. And many of these athletes were persistent. I think it was Michael Jordan who, it is said that, I don't remember how many, the ball was handed to him, I don't know how many times for the last shot in a basketball game. And he said something like 2,000 times, I don't know if it was that many or not for the game, that was handed to him. And out of those different times that he was given the ball to shoot, he said, I think he won the game 26 of those times. But think of the difference, 2,000 shots compared to 26 that won the game. Now, we would think in our mind that with Michael Jordan, he just didn't miss. But he did miss. But it was often given to him. But he said the reason that he was so good is because he never stopped. He kept playing, kept shooting, and just never stopped. That's just like the preacher. That's what I do. I just keep shooting no matter what. I just throw it. And every now and then it'll get lucky and go in. Then I remember there was a guy by the name of, while we're on the subject of never giving up and how he'd become persistent, Larry Bird. How many of you ever watched Larry Bird? I'm talking old athletes. Larry Bird was probably about 6'8", 6'9", but Larry Bird was one of those guys that could just shoot the eyes out of the ball. I mean, he just never missed. It is said that Larry Bird was so persistent with his shot, and he just worked and worked and worked and worked, and he said he took 1,000 shots every single day in order to shoot like he could shoot. And that is so true. And I have tried to shoot as many as I could just playing around. When I had a gym up at Alvin, I shot a lot every day. And I can remember I played myself a game to 21 by ones. And in the three-point line and inside the three. That's the way I did it. And I do 4 of them, 4 sets. And I'm thinking, good grief, that is nowhere near 1,000 shots a day. That's like 100 or so. Think of that. 1,000 shots a day is a lot of shots and a lot of working out. But that's what made Larry Bird so good. He was persistent. He never gave up. Today's story is about a lady who was very persistent as well. And she never gave up. Notice she approaches the judge again and again, asking him to grant her justice against her opponent. This poor soul had several things working against her, and I want to bring those out to you. You may have things working against you that may keep you from being persistent. But listen to this lady's problems that she had. Now, she grew up, not when we grew up. She grew up in what is known as the biblical days. We all know what era that was. The first century, BC or AC, before the Common Era, BC, before the Common Era, BCE. This woman was a woman who was never allowed to speak in the court at all. A woman had no voice in a court, just no voice whatsoever. But yet she goes to this judge. Now, I did read somewhere in a little article, somehow, as I was studying for this, that it was possible that a woman could go before a judge, but it was not probable. But it was possible that they could go, but not probable. In other words, it could have been, or more than likely may not have been, that a woman was even allowed in the court. Now, how she got in, we don't know. But we know that she got to the judge. We know that. Now, we don't know how she did it. But think of that. She wasn't even allowed to be there by no means. But yet, she got there. I wonder what ingeniousness that may have took for her to get to the judge. She was a widow, and she had no husband to speak for her. Notice she was a widow, and no husband was there around for her to speak. Now, I've often said, now I want to tell you this, and this is something that maybe you know or maybe you don't know. Let me give you an idea of what it was like for a woman in the days of Jesus. In Islam, you know a little bit about women are just now almost being able to get their driver's license, right? And they can't walk down the street without the veil. So this is where Jesus is at. And this is a woman. Now let me tell you about what many scholars believe that the idea of a woman was this. She was considered a temptress as a result of what happened in the Garden of Eden. And Adam was tempted by the temptress. So throughout history, she is considered a temptress in the ancient days. Another thing that went along with the woman was not only was she a temptress, but for salvation purposes, she was not even considered, in most beliefs, not worthy of even salvation. Wow. So that put a woman kind of out the door, didn't it? So I want you to get your idea of what it was like for a woman in Jesus' days. She was a widow and had no husband to speak for her. She was a widow and she was often oppressed and often taken advantage of. She was a widow. And a widow was synonymous with being poor. She was very poor. She had no money to help her in law or justice. I don't know if you knew this or not, but that's why Jesus is on these judges and lawyers all the time. Because the court system, even in Jesus' day, was corrupt. It was really corrupt, and there was a lot of cases that were won because of tributes. Money given away. She had no money. Everything is against this woman. The judge refuses at first. But finally, what happened? He decides to give her what she wants. He fears that she will wear him out with her persistence. Jesus makes the point that God is like the judge. Now, think of that. Is God like that judge? I don't know. It seems like we pray and, man, we want it right now, don't we? So maybe, is that true? Is God like this judge? It's sometimes in our mind, in our heart. Now, we wouldn't dare say it, but it does seem to be that we can pray for God and I get healed and right now. But it just don't happen, does it? Then I've heard people say this. I've been around folks and they will have terrible things happen to them, and we would pray, and maybe 5 years down the road they look back and said, I never saw God in that 5 years ago, but now I see God was all over it. Don't know. But God is always there. I want you to know that. I want you to grasp that. And maybe you don't feel Him. Maybe you don't sense Him. Maybe you don't grasp why He's not working or why He's not answering it. This is unjust and all these things. But He's there. God is like the judge who will grant justice to His chosen ones who cry to Him day and night. And He encourages His followers to be like the widow, praying persistently and faithfully. Something going on, keep praying. Don't give up. Persistent prayer is the way to pray. Jesus does not want us to have be casual about prayer, but be serious and intentional, determined and disciplined in your prayer. In other words, be like some of those folks in the Bible that prayed. Daniel prayed morning, noon, and night. For who? Jerusalem. And he got put in the lion's den as a result of it because he was told not to pray. But what did Daniel do? He prayed morning, noon, and night. We are to pray without ceasing. In other words, have the attitude to pray. If it's just a simple little prayer. It's kind of like the word push. Pray until something happens. Yeah, pray until something happens. Jesus does not want us to be casual. Julian of Norwich says this about prayer. Prayer is yearning, beseeching, and beholding. An activity which involves desire, begging, imploring, and finally, seeing God face to face. We understand that, don't we? If you've ever been in the old-time churches or old-time revivals, I can remember so plainly how people would gather at the altar, an old-time preacher come down, and he'd look down at the brother, and they were hollering and squalling and screaming and sweating and crying. And the preacher looked down, have you got through yet, brother? Have you got through? And they would say, not yet. Keep on praying. That's the way it was. People just didn't go and say a few words and go back. But they yearned and they desired and they waited until God moved. Kind of like the old saying in the Bible, get a hold of the horns of the altar and hang on and don't give up. Yeah, that is persistence. And that is prayer. And you don't have to do it at the church, but you can do it at home. And pray. I think that's why churches were dominant in the time. They really prayed. They really seeked and searched for God. And God knew that. And God responded. God wants us to be persistent in lifting up our requests to God. Let me tell you a story that just happened. Unreal! But it's so truthful, and you can ask them, and I'll tell you who they are. Can't remember their names. You ever hear of Stinson United Methodist Church? Do you know where it's at? Ask any of them ladies in the church what happened a couple weeks ago. I went in that church to preach. It was on a Wednesday. No, Monday too. Was it Monday? Sunday, Monday. It was Tuesday night, I think I preached there. A couple of weeks ago or last week. I can't remember. But they had revival, and they asked me to come preach one night. And they had started on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. It was Tuesday night. I was the last night. I go to the church Sunday evening. I go in. I drive up, and I expect about 15 or 20 people like normal. And I drive up, and I look, whoa, the parking lot's full. What is going on here? Well, these cars must be parking, driving somewhere else. I walk in, and the church, 64 people there. And I look, and I think, whoa, what's going on? They must have a real good group of singers coming tonight. I'm wondering who's singing. Well, it wasn't the singers. Well, I thought, well, maybe it's the preacher. It wasn't the preacher either. Let me tell you what happened. And he got up and told this himself, the preacher. The ladies come to him, Stinson, United Methodist Church, and said, we want to have revival. He said, no, you can't have revival. Now, I know that sounds pretty rough. And they said, well, we want to have revival. He said, no, you can't have, nobody's going to come. Nobody will come. And that's probably pretty well right. Nobody's going to come but us if we come. And 10 or 15 of us, it don't matter who you get. It doesn't matter if you get the best singers in the county here. They're not going to come. Well, the women won him over. They said, we're having revival. Let me tell you what them women did. I go back to the church and I said, what happened to you all? And they told me. They said, the preacher, like he said tonight, he told them they couldn't have revival. And said, well, we're going to show him. People will show up. So guess what they did? You know, they got on the phone. They called their neighbors. They called their other church people that went to, there was a lady down there from Johnson Chapel. She come up to me, where do you preach at? And I told her, and I said, well, where are you from? I've never seen you here before. Oh, I go to Johnson Chapel. And she said, well, do you have evening service? I said, no, we do, but I don't preach at them. We have combined services. But anyway, there were 64 that night. And the night before, you know how many was there? Over 70. The night before that, the first night, you know how many was there? There was standing room only. 75 was there. The lowest attended night was the night I preached. 64. Why? Because them women were persistent. They called their cousins, their aunts, their uncles, everybody they could get a hold of to come. They was going to show that preacher, and they did. Persistence. Now, I told him when I was preaching that night, after he had told that, I said, well, he just was fixing you all up real good. They said, no, he meant it. I said, no, he used reverse psychology, and he's sitting there, no. I said, you should be doing this. But it was so cool, though, to see so many people in church because of persistence. I am sure, well, just like the lady from the other church, and some of them people I'd never seen before. Persistence. Let me tell you about another guy who was persistent. Listen to the story. You all ever heard of John Wesley? He's the founder of the Methodist Church, as you all know. Wesley was a pretty determined guy. He really was. Now, he was not your outdoor type preacher. Wesley was not a good, orator, I guess you could say. He was not, what was it they called it? The open air preaching. He was not like good for that. He was built for the uptown, upscale type church. Read the scripture. Read your manuscript. Stay in your robe and pomp. And everybody just listen to you. Their sermons were wonderful, but you can't even understand them when you read them. I've read a lot of them. But he heard a guy by the name of George Whitefield. George Whitefield, or Whitfield, he was a great open-air preacher. Matter of fact, people said that you could, who was it? Some guy had went, I can't remember who it was. I believe it was Benjamin Franklin. Made a story, now don't quote me on this, look it up. But he said he heard George Whitefield preaching. And he took his steps and he counted. And he knew how many to get, Barry? A mile. He said he got away from him for a mile and he could still hear him. Now that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Maybe it wasn't a mile. Maybe it was 500 yards. I don't know. But it was a good distance that he could still hear George Whitefield. Now Wesley was nothing like that. But he knew the resolutions that George Whitefield was having. Souls were being saved. People were coming and worshiping. And he wanted to be a part of it. But yet, he wasn't that type of preacher. But he made himself become that type of a preacher. Now, this is what happened to Mr. Wesley. Listen, on Sunday, and we know that what he did because he always journaled. We know everything about Wesley. Every single day he journaled. And he didn't just write a few things. It was very intense and every moment of his life. And this is what he wrote. Sunday, May the 5th, I preached in a place called St. Anne's. I was asked after the sermon not to come back. Now Sunday, that same day, except it was in the evening, I preached at a place called St. John's. The deacons had a meeting and said, get out and stay out. Sunday, May the 12th, he said, I preached in a place called St. Jude's. And he wrote, I can't go back there either. May the 19th, I preached in St. Somebody Else's. Deacons called a special meeting and said I couldn't return. Now this is discouraging, isn't it? May the 26th, I preached on the street, and they kicked me off the street. Preached at the edge of town on June the 2nd, kicked off the highway. On that Sunday evening, I preached in a field, and they released the bulls on me. But he was still determined. June the 9th, I preached again in a pasture. 10,000 come. Because he didn't give up. He kept preaching and proclaiming. Now, I'm going to tell you, if people would have done me that way, if there wasn't a pat on the back by first sermon, I would have give up. Now, not Wesley. He did not give up. His persistence paid off. Don't give up, church. If we ask God for bread, God will not give us a stone. Don't give up. If we ask for a fish, God will not give us a snake. Don't give up. Trust the Lord who will help, granting us justice and mercy, fullness of life, and everlasting salvation. Don't give up. Try again. You have millions of alternatives. Fill yourself with the bullets of hope, and you will kill failure with one shot, says Israel Moore. Listen to that. Fill yourself with the bullets of hope, and you will kill failure with one shot. I like that. Oh, here was what Jordan said. I had it written down. He says, I missed over 9,000 shots in my career. Michael Jordan. I have lost almost 300 games. 26 times I have been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed. Because I failed. Have you ever failed? I failed. WF. WP, withdrawal passing. I had to. But I kept trying, kept studying, and I passed. Let me tell you, you don't have the sharpest tool in the shed up here. Well, y'all probably figured that out by now. Don't you say amen. But let me tell you something. Because I was determined, Juanita, you ask her. She knows I stayed up 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. I listened to this little recorder everywhere I went, walked, run, jogged, whatever. I graduated college, started in underdevelopmental classes. 099 is developmental. Well, I was under that. I was started 098 to work myself up because I never graduated high school. But I was determined. I always told my daughter, I said, Ambi, it's not how smart you are. It's how determined you are. I graduated college with a 3.33 grade point average. Cum laude. Didn't even know I was an honor student. Didn't know. I should have walked down. I thought I'd just go there and they'd, you just sit there. But I was going to walk down where the honors were. I said, well, if I'd have known that, I'd have went. They wanted me to come walk, but I wouldn't. Decided to go to seminary. Told my buddy, I said, if I fail one class, I quit. I never failed. Graduated in 3.5 years instead of 4. But that's not what Gerald Roberts does. That's what determination and God being your helper can get you through. So don't you give up on God. Don't you give up on life. Don't give up on the church. Your church is your foundation. Your church is what keeps you strong and strengthened and empowered. I really, truly believe that. Because it was church that I kept going to and finally, and I still go as much as I possibly can. It's kind of like that old country song. I like it. I love it. What does it go? You all want more of it? Amen. That's exactly right. Yes. That's God. Hang in there. Don't give up. Yes, your day, it's kind of like the old saying, your day will come. Amen.